The massive double doors of the emergency room hit the wall with a hollow thud. A sharp gust of wind threw a handful of wet leaves and freezing night rain onto the bright linoleum floor. Sarah looked up from the triage log and quickly stepped out from behind the front desk. Standing in the doorway, desperately clinging to the frame, was a young woman. Her long, dark hair was matted into wet strands. The hem of her wide dress was completely soaked through with water and mud. The stranger was struggling to breathe, gasping for air with pale lips. She didn't look at the nurse. Her gaze was locked on the dark street outside the open doors, as if she expected her pursuers to appear from the shadows at any second. The woman took a clumsy step forward and began to collapse. Sarah rushed toward her, managing to catch her under the arms. The wet fabric of the dress was slippery. The stranger slumped against her with all her weight. "Sweetheart. Who did this to you?" Sarah helped her lower onto a stiff waiting room bench. "Hold on. Just wait here. I'm paging the on-call doctor." The woman grabbed Sarah by the sleeve of her scrubs. Her fingers were ice-cold and stiff. "They killed him." The stranger's voice cracked into a hoarse whisper. She curled into herself, wrapping her arms protectively around her large, pregnant belly. A spasm of severe pain twisted her face. "Out there. In the alley. Who was killed, honey? You need to stay calm." Sarah quickly hit the intercom button on the wall. "I need a crash cart in the ER lobby stat. We have an emergency delivery." The woman shook her head, refusing to let go of Sarah's sleeve. Her dark eyes looked feverish, almost frantic. "Save my babies. I'm begging you," she gasped. And then, a dark liquid pooled onto the linoleum beneath her. Her water had broken, mixed heavily with blood. Within a minute, the hallway erupted with sound, the clatter of a gurney's wheels, the rapid footsteps of orderlies, the sharp commands of the on-call obstetrician. Sarah had to physically pry the girl's fingers open just to transfer her onto the gurney. In the operating room, the surgical lights blinded them with a ruthless, white glare. Sarah moved on, autopilot. These were the familiar, practiced motions of years in labor and delivery. She hooked up the IV lines and attached the monitors. But a tight, sinking dread was building inside her chest. "Blood pressure is dropping," the anesthesiologist called out, eyes glued to the screen. "Pulse is thready. She has massive blunt force trauma to her right side," the surgeon stated, quickly scrubbing in. "Looks like she fell, or was pushed hard. Placentale abruption. Internal bleeding. Prep for an emergency C-section. Stat. Get O-negative blood and plasma in here right now." The stranger was breathing in rapid, shallow gasps. Sarah stood at the head of the table, gently wiping the dirt and sweat from her young, beautiful face with a damp cloth. The girl couldn't have been more than 18. "Come on, sweetie. Hang in there," Sarah murmured softly, adjusting the oxygen mask. "You have to stay strong for the baby." The surgeon worked fast, without wasting a single word. A few minutes later, a weak but demanding cry pierced the tense air of the operating room. "It's a boy." The surgeon handed the infant to the neonatal nurse. "Careful. Low birth weight." Sarah looked at the newborn. Olive skin, a thick patch of dark hair. The girl on the operating table flinched slightly at the sound of the cry, but she didn't open her eyes. "Wait." The surgeon's voice suddenly turned sharp. "There's a second one." The operating room grew even quieter. Sarah held her breath. "Twins." A minute later, a second cry echoed, this one louder and clearer. "Ah, girl," the doctor said. "Get them both into incubators." Right now. Sarah watched the two tiny, swaddled bundles being rushed out to the NICU. Twins. The children, she and her husband, Greg, had been trying to conceive for 10 long years. 10 years of endless tests. Injection. Painful procedures. And empty hopes. They had been saving every penny for expensive IVF treatments. Denying themselves everything. Only to face negative result after negative result. A sharp, monotonous alarm from the monitor snapped her back to reality. Vitals are crashing. The anesthesiologist yelled. She's going into cardiac arrest. Get the paddles. Charge to 200. Clear. The girl's body arched off the table from the shock. Then slumped back down lifelessly. Again. Charge to 250. Clear. Sarah stood against the wall. Her hands tightly clasped together. She watched the young mother's face turn a translucent, ghostly white. Her features sharpened. The massive blood loss from the trauma, combined with severe psychological shock, was simply incompatible with life. Her body, having given its absolute last drop of strength to save the two infants, simply refused to fight any longer. After 40 minutes of desperate resuscitation, the surgeon let out a heavy sigh and pulled off his bloody gloves. She's not holding, he said numbly. Pulse is barely palpable. Prep the paperwork. There's almost no chance. The doctors began to file out of the OR, speaking in hushed voices. Sarah was left alone. She needed to prep the patient for transfer and clear out the surgical equipment. She walked up to the table. The girl lay perfectly still. Her face had smoothed out, the grimace of pain was gone. Sarah took her hand to remove the pulse oximeter from her finger. And suddenly felt a weak, barely perceptible movement. The girl's fingers twitched and weakly closed around Sarah's wrist. Sarah stumbled back, barely holding in a scream. The young mother's eyelids fluttered and slowly, painstakingly opened. The gaze in her dark eyes was fading. No longer tied to this world. But it burned with an incredible, desperate willpower. She wasn't dead yet. She was clinging to her very last seconds of life. Sarah leaned in close to her face. I'm here. I'm right here. She whispered. I swear. To God. You have a kind soul. The girl's voice sounded like the rustling of dry paper. Every single syllable required immense effort. Hide them. Hide who? Honey, the police will find your family. No. The girl's fingers dug into Sarah's arm with shocking strength, leaving red marks on her skin. Do not give them to the state. They will find them. They will ruin them. Their blood is tainted. My father will never forgive this. She swallowed hard. A drop of sweat rolled down her chin. The girl uncurled her left fist, which she had kept pressed tightly against her chest the entire time. A heavy, antique pendant with a large, dark red garnet fell onto the white sheet, along with a crumpled, mud-stained paper envelope. Take it. The girl exhaled. Her eyes began to roll back. Promise me. Sarah stared at the pendant. She looked at the pale face of a mother who had just traded her life for these two babies. Her mind raced. She thought of the empty nursery in her apartment. She thought of the tiny knit booties she had bought years ago and hidden in the back of her closet. She thought about how these children, if left to the foster care system, would be doomed. Sarah placed her warm palm over the stranger's ice-cold hand. I won't let them be taken. Do you hear me? They will be mine. I swear it to you. The girl let out a faint sigh. The ghost of a smile touched her pale lips. Her hand finally relaxed, slipping from Sarah's grip. This time, the monitors flatlined forever. Maya was gone. Sarah stood in the absolute silence of the operating room. Then, with a quick, deliberate motion, she swept the pendant and the envelope into the deep pocket of her scrubs. The morning was gray and bitterly cold. Rain poured relentlessly, drumming a monotonous beat against the hospital's metal windowsills. Sarah sat in the office of Dr. Valeria Evans, the head of the maternity ward. The room smelled of old paperwork, rubbing alcohol, and strong black tea. Dr. Evans, a heavy-set woman with deep lines of exhaustion etched around her mouth, was carefully reading the night shift report. So, she had no ID on her, the head doctor stated, taking off her horn-rimmed glasses. Admitted in a state of shock. Died from massive blood loss. 2 premature babies. A classic tragedy. I'm going to call the police right now. They'll process the body as a Jane Doe. And Child Protective Services will take the infants. She reached for the desk phone. Don't call them. Dr. Evans. Sarah's voice was steady. But her hands, resting in her lap, were clasped tightly together. The head doctor froze. She looked at Sarah over the rim of her glasses. Sarah, are you out of your mind? Protocol dictates, I must report an unidentified body and process the transfer of orphans to a state facility. Process her as an unidentified Jane Doe. Sarah said firmly. The police can take the body. But the children. I process the children as safe haven drop-offs left on the hospital porch. Dr. Evans slowly placed the phone receiver back onto the cradle. The office went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the old mini-fridge in the corner. Are you insane? The head doctor's voice dropped to a harsh whisper. You are asking me to commit official misconduct. Falsifying medical and legal documents. That's a felony. Sarah. For what I will take them into foster care. Sarah looked straight into her boss's eyes. As foundlings. I'll file the adoption papers immediately. 2 newborns. From a completely unknown mother, Sarah. Come to your senses. You don't know who their parents are. What genetic diseases they might have. You know exactly why. Dr. Evans. Sarah cut her off without raising her voice. But a hidden agony bled through her tone. Greg and I have been trying for 10 years. You were the one who sent me to the fertility clinic in the city. You know I got my final diagnosis last month. I will never be able to carry a child myself. This is my only chance. My absolute last chance to be a mother. The head doctor looked away. She knew Sarah's story. She knew how this hard-working, kind nurse had cried in the break room after yet another negative test. She knew how Sarah stayed hours after her shifts ended, just to hold the abandoned babies in the nursery. The girl told me right before she died that if they go into the system, her father's people will track them down. They'll kill them or hurt them. Sarah leaned forward. I don't know who she was running from. But I saw her bruises. Those weren't accidental injuries. She was intentionally beaten. If we process them as her biological children, their paper trail can be tracked into foster care. If they are safe haven drop-offs, the trail ends at our back door. These are fairy tales. Sarah. What pursuers? We don't live in a mob movie. I swore an oath to her. Sarah repeated stubbornly. I am not giving them up. Doctor. Evans sighed heavily and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Even if I lose my mind and agree to this insane stunt. Do you have any idea? How many agencies will vet the paperwork for foundlings? I'll have to involve CPS anyway. I'll have to write up fake discovery reports. This is a massive risk for me. For the nursing staff. For this entire hospital. I cannot put my people in jeopardy just to satisfy your maternal instinct. Silently, Sarah unzipped her work bag. She pulled out a thick white envelope, wrapped in a rubber band. Inside was every single dollar she and Greg had saved over the last 5 years. The money for the expensive IVF treatment in New York. Money scraped together from base salaries, night shifts, and overtime. She placed the envelope on the desk and slid it toward Dr. Evans. The head doctor's face changed. She sat up violently. Put that away right now. Do you think I take bribes? No. Sarah shook her head. I've worked under you for 8 years. And I know you are an honest woman. I know you paid out of your own pocket last month to fix the wiring in the treatment room. The city slashed our budget. The roof on the second floor is literally leaking into the patient rooms. You've written dozens of grant requests. And they denied every single one. Sarah nodded at the envelope. There's $20,000 in there. That's enough for emergency roof repairs and a down payment on a new preemie incubator. It's not going into your pocket. It is my charitable donation to the needs of this maternity ward. We will officially file the paperwork for a voluntary contribution. In exchange, you will help me draft the proper paperwork for infants discovered on the hospital steps, without involving the police in the fact of their birth. Dr. Evans stared at the thick envelope for a very long time. A heavy silence hung in the room. Outside, the rain continued to pour. The head doctor thought about the leaking roof that had forced her to close 2 patient rooms. She thought about the hospital's empty bank accounts. She thought about the 2 tiny, dark-haired bundles currently in the NICU. And she thought about pale, unyielding Sarah, ready to give up her absolute last dime for 2 strangers' children. Slowly, Dr. Evans opened her desk drawer and pulled out a blank Safe Haven discovery form. This morning at 6:00 a.m. During a routine perimeter check, Janitor Maria discovered 2 baskets containing newborns on the steps of the rear emergency exit. Dr. Evans stated in a dry, professional tone. Not looking at Sarah. The infants were wrapped in non-hospital blankets. No signs of biological relation to the Jane Doe who expired overnight have been established. She pulled a pen toward herself. Go back to your post. Sarah. Call Maria into my office. I will instruct her on what to tell CPS. And you better pray to God we don't end up in adjoining prison cells for this. Sarah stood up. Her knees were trembling, but her back remained perfectly straight. Thank you, Dr. Evans. She walked out into the hallway, pulling the door shut behind her. She leaned her shoulder against the cold, painted wall, and for the first time that entire night, allowed herself to close her eyes. In her scrub pocket, the stranger's gold pendant felt like a cold stone. She was a mother now, and there was no turning back. 6 months prior, Richard Sterling's sprawling home office smelled of expensive cigars, worn leather, and strong black coffee. Heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking the bright Texas sun from entering the room. Richard sat behind a massive oak desk, methodically sorting through a stack of legal documents. His large hands, with their knotted knuckles, moved with confident, unhurried precision. Maya stood in the middle of the room, her back straight. She wore a simple cotton dress, her dark hair woven into a tight braid. But her posture screamed defiance. The matter is settled. Richard didn't even look up at his daughter as he scrawled his signature across another form. On Friday, Vance's family is coming over. We are finalizing the wedding details. I will hear no objections. I will not marry him. Father. Maya's voice was steady, though it took every ounce of her willpower not to start screaming. You cannot force me. Richard put his pen down. He slowly raised his head. In his dark, deep-set eyes, there was no anger. There was only the heavy, crushing certainty of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. I am not forcing you. I am informing you of a fact. You are 18. It is time to grow up and understand how this world works. Vance's family owns the land that borders our eastern pastures. Their logistics and trucking company will solve every supply chain issue we have. Merging our assets doubles this business. It guarantees that your children and grandchildren will never know a day of hardship. I don't want a business built on the grave of my life. Maya took a step toward the desk. Vance is a cruel man. He's rotten inside. You've seen how he treats the ranch hands. He beats the horses just for fun when he thinks no one is looking. That is men's business. Richard snapped. A firm hand is required for management. He will treat you differently. He knows my word is law. He is an arrogant coward. Maya slammed her hands on the edge of the desk. Looking her father dead in the eye, I would rather leave this house with nothing than share a bed with him. I am not one of your breeding mares. Father. You don't get to write me into a contract. Richard's face darkened. He stood up heavily from the desk. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. You forget yourself. I gave you too much freedom. I indulged your tantrums too often after your mother died. That is my fault. But playtime is over. You will marry Vance because that is my decision. Because the future of this dynasty is on the line. Your opinion means absolutely nothing here. I have my own future. And it is not with him. Ah. With that mechanic from the lumber yard. Richard smirked. Though the smile didn't reach his eyes. Did you really think I didn't know who you were sneaking off to see across the river, Liam? A nobody. No money. No name. No prospects. You think that's love? It's teenage rebellion. It'll evaporate after a month of living in a trailer park. Maya turned pale. She had no idea her father knew about Liam. Don't you dare speak about him like that. He is a good, honest man. Honesty doesn't put food on the table. Richard replied coldly. He stepped out from behind the desk and walked toward the door. You are not going anywhere. You will sit in your room until Friday and think about your duty to this family. Rosa will bring you your meals. I am taking your phone. Father. No. Maya lunged after him. But Richard was already in the hallway. The heavy oak door slammed shut. Maya heard the deadbolt turn twice. She slammed her palms against the solid wood. Then pressed her forehead against it. A hot wave of despair rose in her chest. But there were no tears. Only a clear, cold realization, if she stayed here, her life was over. The night was pitch black. With no moon in the sky. Maya moved quickly and silently. She packed a small duffel bag with only the absolute essentials: a sweater, a couple of t-shirts, jeans, and whatever cash she had saved from her allowance. Her bedroom window overlooked the backyard. Right beneath it grew a massive, ancient oak tree, its branches brushing against the sill. Maya slung the bag over her shoulder, opened the window, and breathed in the cold night air. It was a steep drop. But she felt no fear. Staying was far more terrifying. She climbed over the sill, found a sturdy branch with her foot, and began her descent. The bark scraped her palms, her jacket caught on twigs. A minute later, her boots hit the soft dirt. Maya ran through the sleeping town without looking back. By the time she reached their meeting spot, an abandoned bus stop on the edge of the highway, she was gasping for air. Sitting on the bench was a young man in a faded denim jacket. Seeing her, he stood up abruptly. Liam. Tall. broad-shouldered. With an honest, open face. Maya threw herself at him. He caught her, pulling her tightly against his chest. His jacket smelled of wood shavings, motor oil, and the crisp wind. "I thought you weren't coming," Liam said quietly, burying his face in her hair. "My father locked me in. He set a wedding date with Vance. I had to climb out the window." Liam pulled back. His fingers gripped her shoulders firmly. In the distant glow of a streetlight, his blue eyes looked worried, but fiercely determined. "There's no turning back. Maya, if we leave now, your father will never forgive this. My home is wherever you are now." She answered with absolute certainty. "Take me away. Please." They left on the first morning Greyhound bus. They got married at a courthouse in a different county a month later. Quietly. Without guests. Without a white dress. Maya wore a simple, light-colored sundress. Liam bought 2 thin gold wedding bands with the money he made selling his old motorcycle. Their entire life fit into a tiny, rented apartment on the edge of an industrial district. The wallpaper was peeling. The floorboards creaked. And a draft blew through the old windows. But to Maya, this place was a palace. A palace where she could finally breathe freely. Liam got a job at a local auto repair shop. He left early in the morning and came back late at night. Exhausted. His hands stained black with grease, but he always had a smile on his face. Maya learned how to cook on an old electric hot plate. She made the place cozy using cheap fabrics from the discount store, and spent her evenings waiting to hear his footsteps on the stairs. They lived modestly, counting every penny. Richard never searched for his daughter. His pride had been wounded too deeply. He completely erased Maya from his life, announcing to the family that she had disgraced their legacy. Autumn arrived. The days grew shorter and cold. Relentless rain began to fall. Maya was in her 7th month of pregnancy. Her belly was large and heavy, pulling constantly at her lower back. One November evening, Liam came home from work earlier than usual. Maya was sitting at the kitchen table, sewing up a tear in his work shirt. He walked up behind her, wrapped his arms around her shoulders, and gently placed his hands on her round belly. "How are you two doing in there?" he asked softly. "Kicking like crazy." Maya smiled, covering his hands with hers. "Hasn't given me a minute of peace all day. Going to be just as restless as you." Liam walked around the chair and squatted down in front of her. He pulled a small paper bag out of his jacket pocket. "Close your eyes." Maya obediently squeezed her eyes shut. She heard the soft rustle of paper. "Open them." Resting on his wide, calloused palm were 2 pairs of tiny, knitted booties. One pair was a soft, pale yellow. The other was a light mint green. The soft yarn looked weightless against his rough, mechanic's hands. Maya gasped. "They are so tiny." She carefully picked one up, inspecting the neat stitching. "But why 2 pairs? We're only having one. The ultrasound said so. The ultrasound machine at our free clinic is so old, you wouldn't be able to spot an elephant on it." Liam chuckled. "But the old lady at the flea market where I bought these looked at me and said, 'Take 2. So, I have a 6th sense for these things. It's definitely going to be twins. So, I took them. If anything, they'll just grow into the 2nd pair." Maya pressed the booties against her cheek. The yarn was a little scratchy, but it radiated a wonderful warmth. She looked at Liam, at his tired but infinitely familiar face, and felt a ringing, absolute sense of happiness. They would be okay. They were going to be just fine. A few more weeks passed. It was late November. The wind had stripped the last black leaves from the trees. In the evenings, the city plunged into a thick, damp darkness. Around 10:00 p.m. Maya suddenly had an unbearable craving for ice cream. It was silly and terrible timing. Outside, a cold, freezing drizzle was falling. But the craving felt almost physically painful. Liam. I'm so sorry. She looked guiltily at her husband, who had just stepped out of the shower. I know it's late, but I swear I'll lose my mind if I don't get a vanilla bar right now. Liam laughed, dwelling off his wet hair. Ice cream in November. Classic. Stay where it's warm. I'll run down to the corner store. I'll be back in 5 minutes. He threw his jacket right over his t-shirt, slid into his sneakers, and walked out. Maya was left alone. The apartment felt stuffy from the space heater. She walked over to the window and cracked it open. But she still couldn't get enough fresh air. Suddenly, a strange, pulling anxiety settled in her chest. Her heart started beating faster. Her palms grew sweaty. She threw her wide winter coat over her shoulders, slid her feet into her boots, and stepped out onto the landing. She just needed some fresh air. She decided to go down to the first floor and wait for Liam by the front door of the building. The steps of the old walk-up creaked beneath her feet. The light bulb on the ground floor had burned out long ago, and the exit was illuminated only by the dim, yellow glow of a street lamp from the courtyard. Maya pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped out under the awning. The air was sharp, smelling of wet asphalt and rotting leaves. The rain was picking up. At the end of the dark alley leading to their building, a familiar figure appeared. Liam was walking quickly, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. Maya smiled and opened her mouth to call out to him, but the words died in her throat. From the brick wall of the adjacent building, 3 dark shadows detached themselves. They moved completely silently, cutting off Liam's path. In the dim, yellow light of the street lamp, Maya recognized a tall, slouching figure in an expensive leather coat. Vance? She didn't have time to scream. She didn't have time to warn him. One of Vance's thugs stepped right in front of Liam, grabbing his attention. At that exact second, Vance stepped out from behind him. In his hand, a heavy metal object gleamed dully. He swung. A sickening, hollow thud echoed in the alley. Liam didn't make a single sound. His knees buckled, and he collapsed heavily, unnaturally, face first onto the wet asphalt. A white paper bag with the ice cream flew out of his pocket and rolled into a puddle. No. Maya's scream shattered the silence of the night. She rushed forward, forgetting her heavy belly, forgetting all caution. The 3 men whipped around. The thugs took a step back, but Vance remained standing over Liam's body. He was breathing heavily, seeing Maya, his face twisted with pure malice and wounded ego. Maya. What a pleasant surprise. Vance's voice trembled with hatred. He took a step toward her. His expensive boots squelched against the wet pavement. Did you really think you could hide from me in this dump? Did you think I would just swallow the fact that you traded me for this penniless bastard? What did you do? Maya dropped to her knees next to Liam. She tried to roll him over. Her fingers slipped against his wet jacket. On the back of her husband's head, a dark, sticky pool of blood was rapidly spreading. Liam wasn't breathing. His face was terrifyingly white. I washed away my humiliation. Vance stepped right up to her. He loomed over her, radiating the smell of expensive cologne and cold fury. The entire town was laughing at me. My father cancelled the merger with Richard. You disgraced me in front of my entire family. Maya looked up at him. In her eyes, there was no fear. Only pure, concentrated hatred. Damn you to hell. You were always a coward. You only know how to hit someone in the back. Vance's face broke out in angry red blotches. His wounded pride blinded him. He couldn't bear that look in her eyes. You bitch, he spat. And violently shoved her by the shoulder. The push was brutal and unexpected. Maya lost her balance on the slick asphalt. She tried to catch herself with her hands. But the weight of her belly pulled her down. She fell hard on her side, violently slamming her hip and stomach against the unforgiving edge of the concrete curb. A sharp, tearing agony ripped through her body, radiating from her lower back down to her pelvis. Maya screamed, desperately gasping for the freezing air. On the second floor of the building, a window squeaked open. Hey, what the hell is going on down there? I'm calling the cops, a gruff male voice yelled. Vance flinched, snapping out of his rage. He looked at Maya, curled in agony on the ground. Then, at Liam's motionless body. And finally up at the lights turning on in the building. We leave. Now. He barked at his men. They quickly vanished into the darkness of the alley. Maya was left alone. The rain lashed against her face, mixing with her tears. The pain in her stomach refused to let go. It rolled over her in tight, spasming waves. Liam, she whispered, reaching for his cold hand. Get up. Please get up. But his hand slipped lifelessly from her fingers. Suddenly, she felt something hot and sticky flowing down the inside of her thighs. Her water had broken. And with it came a primal, animal terror. Vance would come back. He would realize she was alive, and that she saw everything. He wouldn't leave a witness. The instinct for self-preservation, and the desperate need to protect the only thing she had left of Liam, proved stronger than the pain. Maya struggled to her feet, leaning heavily against the wet brick wall. She swayed. Black spots swam before her eyes. She didn't go back into the apartment. She didn't wait for the police or an ambulance. In a state of profound shock, stumbling blindly, Maya staggered out of the alley. The pain folded her in half, forcing her to stop and press her body against the cold walls of passing buildings. In one dark entryway, Maya collapsed onto a step for a few minutes. With trembling fingers, she pulled a crumpled piece of paper and a stub of a pencil from her bag. She knew that if she didn't survive, her children needed to know the truth. Every single word required fighting through the agony. But she wrote about Liam, about Vance, about her father, and about why they needed to be hidden. She walked through the night, unable to feel the cold, completely ignoring the rare cars driving past. She was driven by only one singular goal: get as far away as possible. Save the babies. How long she walked? An hour? 12? An eternity? Maya didn't know. The streets blurred into one gray, wet ribbon. Up ahead, cutting through the veil of rain, a bright white light flickered. Above the porch of a small brick building glowed a Red Cross sign. A hospital. Maya made one final, desperate push. Her legs were no longer obeying her. The hem of her coat was soaked in mud and blood. She climbed the low concrete steps, threw her entire body weight against the heavy double doors of the emergency room, and shoved them open. The door swung wide with a hollow thud, slamming against the wall. A harsh, bright light blinded her. Maya took a clumsy step forward, desperately clinging to the doorframe, and began to collapse onto the bright linoleum floor. Almost 3 weeks passed. The twins had grown stronger, David had started taking the bottle on his own. Lily was steadily gaining weight. The paperwork had been legally processed as temporary foster care for abandoned infants. Dr. Evans pushed the discharge through without asking any unnecessary questions. Unlocking the apartment door wasn't easy. Sarah's hands were shaking as she tried to turn the key in the lock. Hanging heavily from the crooks of both elbows were 2 hospital car seats. Inside them, tightly swaddled, 2 tiny bundles were quietly breathing. The entryway smelled of familiar comfort fried onions, clean laundry, and men's cologne. From the kitchen came the muffled sound of the television. Sarah Gregg's voice sounded surprised. A rectangle of yellow light spilled into the hallway. Her husband stepped out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "Why are you home so early? Doesn't your shift end at 8? He cut himself off. Noticing the car seats, his gaze slid over his wife's pale, drawn face, then dropped to the sleeping infants. "What is this?" Gregg took a step back, as if the car seats were dangerous. "These are our children, Gregg." Sarah's voice was hoarse and weak from the sleepless night. She carefully placed the carriers onto the low shoe rack and began unzipping her jacket. "A boy and a girl. Their mother died on the operating table. They were going to be sent into the system. I did the paperwork." The towel slowly slipped from Gregg's hands and fell onto the linoleum. Ugly red blotches spread across his face. "What children, are you out of your mind?" He raised his voice, but immediately glanced nervously at the front door, as if afraid the neighbors would hear. "Whose kids are these? You said the woman died. Who was she?" Sarah looked him dead in the eye. "A young girl. She was a runaway. A stranger." A thick, heavy silence descended upon the hallway. The only sound was David squirming in one of the carriers. "A stranger," Gregg repeated, tasting the word. His face twisted into a grimace of pure disgust. "You dragged some stray's bastard kids into my house. Don't you dare talk about them like that." She stepped forward, instinctively shielding the carriers with her body. "How am I supposed to talk about them?" Gregg snapped, escalating to a yell. He grabbed his head with both hands. "We have been doing treatments for 10 years. We've been saving every dime for IVF in New York. You restrict yourself from everything. I am breaking my back, working 2 jobs. And for what? So you can come home from your shift and drop 2 mutts with God knows what genetics on the floor." He suddenly froze, his eyes going wide with a sudden realization. "Sarah, how did you even get the paperwork pushed through so fast? CPS strings people along for months." She looked away. She knew this moment was coming, but she didn't think it would be this hard. "The head doctor helped me. We processed them as safe haven drop-offs. I gave her our envelope, Gregg, as a charitable donation to the hospital. Otherwise, they would have been taken into the system. And people were looking for them. You gave away our money." Gregg stumbled back, his shoulders hitting the wall. $20,000. Everything we saved for 5 years, you gave it away for someone else's trash. They are living human beings." Sarah raised her voice too, feeling desperation boiling inside her. "Gregg, I got my final diagnosis. I will never be able to give birth. This was our only chance. Look at them. They are so tiny." She tried to reach out and take her husband's hand, but he yanked his arm away in disgust. "This is your chance. Not mine. I wanted my own child. My own blood. Not this garbage. Tomorrow morning, you are taking them right back. You tell them you made a mistake. And you get that money back. Whatever it takes. I am not taking them anywhere. They are staying right here." Gregg looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. In his eyes, there was no sympathy, No understanding. Only the cold, calculating selfishness of a man whose plans had been rudely interrupted. He turned around, walked into the bedroom, and slammed the door behind him. Sarah was left alone in the hallway. Lily let out a soft cry. Sarah dropped to her knees right onto the dirty welcome mat, pulled both carriers tightly to her chest, and buried her face in the stiff fabric. That entire period blended into one endless, grueling shift for Sarah. The apartment constantly smelled of boiled milk, baby soap, and wet cloth. Sarah slept in frantic 2-hour bursts. The twins demanded constant attention. If David fell asleep, Lily woke up. The boy had been born weak. He frequently spit up his formula and cried through the night, kicking his little olive-skinned legs. Greg moved out of the bedroom and started sleeping on the couch in the living room. He built an invisible wall between himself and this new reality. He left for work early in the morning and came back late. He stopped eating dinner at home, claiming he was too tired, and avoided walking into the bedroom where 2 used cribs bought by Sarah from a thrift store now stood. He never washed a single bottle. He never got up in the night. If the babies cried too loudly, Greg simply cranked up the volume on the TV or put on his headphones. Sarah lost weight. Deep, dark shadows settled under her eyes. But inside her, day by day, a strange, calm certainty grew stronger. She was bonding with these children with a primal, instinctual love. She knew every breath they took, every little crease on their skin. That Saturday, Sarah was ironing laundry in the kitchen. The iron hissed quietly, letting out bursts of steam. Washed baby bottles lined the table. Greg walked into the kitchen, fully dressed in his street clothes. He was holding a large duffel bag. Sarah set the iron upright on its base. She looked at the bag, then up at her husband's face. It was calm, almost indifferent. "I found a place to rent," Greg said in a flat tone, avoiding her eyes. "Close to work." Sarah stayed silent. She wiped her damp hands on her apron. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "This isn't a life. It's an insane asylum. I come home and I want to relax, not listen to endless screaming. I look at them, and I know I will never be able to love them. They are strangers. They even smell different. They smell like babies." "Greg. No. I warned you on the very first day. You made your choice. I gave you time to come to your senses. But you've lost your mind over them." He placed his bag on a stool and pulled a keyring out of his jacket pocket. "I am giving you an ultimatum. One last time. It's me, or these stray puppies. Choose. You call CPS. You give them back, and we try to start over. I'll even forgive you for the money. We'll earn it back." Sarah walked over to the window. Gray raindrops slid down the glass, leaving muddy streaks. 10 years of marriage. 10 years of trying to build a family. And now this man stands before her, bartering with the lives of 2 infants. She turned back to her husband. Her spine was perfectly straight. There was no anger in her voice. And no tears. "They are my children. You can get the hell out." Greg scoffed, a nasty smirk touching the corner of his lips. "You're an idiot. You're going to rot in poverty with them. Look at yourself. Look what you've turned into in just 3 months." He tossed his keys onto the kitchen table. They clattered against the glass of a baby bottle. "I'm going to grab my razor and my laptop from the bedroom." He tossed over his shoulder, walking out into the hallway. Sarah stayed in the kitchen. She heard Greg moving around the bedroom, opening closets, Then came the sound of a dresser drawer closing, the exact drawer where she kept a wooden jewelry box holding her emergency stash. About $150 in cash, saved from extra shifts for a rainy day. A minute later, the front door slammed shut. Sarah didn't go out to see him off. She walked over to the cribs. The babies were sleeping. Sarah adjusted the blanket over Lily and gently kissed David's warm forehead. "It's just us now," she said quietly. "Just you and me." She walked into the bedroom to clear away the things her husband had left behind. Mechanically, she pulled open the dresser drawer. The wooden jewelry box was not in its usual spot. The lid was slightly ajar. Sarah flipped the lid open. Inside lay only Maya's antique garnet pendant and the crumpled letter. The money was gone. Greg had taken every last cent. He took what rightfully belonged to the children, leaving their mother completely without means to survive. Sarah slowly closed the drawer. She didn't cry. Her husband's betrayal burned away the very last of her illusions, leaving behind only a cold, calculating emptiness. She needed to find a work-from-home job immediately. February slammed the city with a brutal cold snap and freezing, icy winds. The radiators in the old apartment barely put out any heat, and a nasty draft swept across the floorboards. That night, Sarah woke up to a strange noise. It was coming from David's crib. It wasn't a cry, it was a harsh, barking cough, sounding almost like a seal. Sarah instantly threw off her blanket and rushed to her son. In the dim glow of the nightlight, she saw a terrifying sight. 3-month-old David was lying on his back. His neck arched unnaturally. His face had gone pale, and a distinct, bluish triangle had formed around his lips. The boy was gasping for air with his mouth wide open. But every breath required immense effort, accompanied by a wheezing, whistling sound. The child's ribcage caved inward with every frantic gasp. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, feeling her hands go ice cold. As a medical professional, she instantly recognized the symptoms. Croup. Acute laryngeal stenosis. His airway was swelling shut. She snatched the boy out of the crib. He was burning up. His skin was on fire. "David. Baby. Breathe. Breathe for mama." Sarah pressed him against her shoulder and rushed into the bathroom. She cranked the hot water in the shower to full blast and plugged the tub. The small room quickly began to fill with thick, heavy steam. The moist air was supposed to help relieve the spasms slightly. David continued to wheeze. His tiny fingers desperately clutched the fabric of Sarah's nightgown. Sarah needed medication. A corticosteroid to reduce the swelling in his throat, and a nebulizer. Her home first aid kit only had infant Tylenol suppositories. She ran back into the living room, holding the suffocating baby with one arm, grabbed the landline with the other, and dialed 900 F. "Please hold. We are experiencing a high volume of calls and a shortage of ambulances. The flu is sweeping the city. We will dispatch a unit within the hour." The indifferent, automated voice of the dispatcher stated before putting her on hold. An hour. David might not survive until the paramedics arrived. The swelling was getting worse. Sarah ran to the dresser, yanking open the bottom drawer, where she kept the loose change she had made selling old clothes at the flea market. There were $30. A nebulizer and the necessary ampoules of budesonide cost over $200. Greg had never returned the money he stole. There was no time to think. Sarah wrapped the wheezing baby tightly in a thick wool blanket. She bolted out onto the apartment landing and began pounding on her neighbor's door. Old Mrs. Higgins lived there. A shuffling sound came from behind the door, and the deadbolt clicked. Mrs. Higgins stood there in her bathrobe, blinking in fright. Freshly woken from sleep. Sarah. Dear. What happened? Is there a fire? Mrs. Higgins. I am begging you. Please sit with Lily. She's asleep. David has the croup. He's suffocating. The ambulance is going to take an hour. I desperately need to get to the 2-4-hour pharmacy. The old woman saw the infant's blue face poking out of the blanket and gasped. Run. Honey. Run. Of course. I'll watch her. Sarah didn't even change clothes. She threw a long winter coat right over her nightgown, shoved her bare feet into her winter boots, and ran out into the street. The rain was coming down in sheets. Freezing drops lashed at her face, mixing with tears of absolute despair. Sarah ran through the dark, icy puddles, clutching the heavy bundle to her chest. David was breathing heavily, with a terrifying, high-pitched whistle. His head lolled lifelessly against her arm. The 2-4-hour pharmacy was 2 blocks away. Sarah burst into the brightly lit building, gasping for air. A puddle of muddy water instantly pooled around her boots on the clean tile floor. Behind the bulletproof glass sat a young pharmacist, lazily flipping through a magazine. Miss. Please, Sarah threw herself at the window. I need a nebulizer and budesonide vials. Stat. My baby is suffocating. The pharmacist took one look at David's blue face, quickly stood up, and brought back a box with the machine and the medication. $245. Sarah slammed the crumpled $30 onto the glass counter. This is all I have. Her voice cracked. She looked at the girl with pure desperation. Please. I will bring the rest tomorrow. I'm a nurse at City General. Let me leave my ID as collateral. I'm begging you. He's going to die. The pharmacist looked at Sarah with genuine pity, but shook her head. Mom. I can't. We keep strict inventory. And there are cameras right above me. The money would come straight out of my paycheck. Go to the ER. The ambulance is an hour out. Sarah screamed. David let out a weak raspy groan. I can't help you. The pharmacist pulled the boxes away from the window slot. Sarah recoiled from the glass. A cold, deafening panic rose in her chest. She looked frantically out the pharmacy window at the empty street. On the opposite side of the road, a dim neon sign was flickering. 2-4-hour pawn shop. Sarah bolted out of the pharmacy and sprinted across the street, not even checking for cars. The door to the pawn shop was made of heavy iron. Inside, it smelled of stale tobacco and dampness. Behind a clouded, bulletproof window sat a heavy-set man with a puffy face. He was watching a tiny television. Sarah rushed to the window, holding her suffocating son with her right arm. She used her left hand to frantically yank her smooth gold wedding band off her ring finger. It was stuck tight. Sarah pulled with all her strength, scraping the skin off her knuckle. The ring slid off, leaving a deep, pale indentation on her finger, the literal mark of her ruined past life. She slammed the ring into the metal transaction tray and shoved it under the glass. Appraise this. Now. The man reluctantly tore his eyes away from the TV, picked up the ring, and twirled it in his fingers. He checked the hallmark through a jeweler's loop. Thin. 14 karat. Barely a few grams. He stated indifferently. I'll give you $80. It's worth at least 400. Sarah gasped. Ninete. The man tossed the ring back into the tray. That's my final offer. Don't like it? Go somewhere else. Nobody else is open at 3 a.m. Sarah looked down at David. The boy had stopped crying. His breathing was shallow and jagged. His eyes were rolling back, There was no time to negotiate. She frantically unclasped the thin gold chain around her neck, a graduation gift from her mother when she finished nursing school. "Take this too." She threw the chain into the tray. "Give me $280. I just need enough for a nebulizer. I don't need anything else." The man looked at the pale, soaking wet woman, and at the infant turning blue in her arms. He sighed and picked up the chain. "Slide your ID through. 280. That's the ceiling." Sarah snatched the crumpled bills from the tray, leaving her driver's license behind as collateral. She didn't even count the money. A minute later, she was back inside the pharmacy. After buying the machine and the medicine, Sarah didn't run home. She ripped the packaging open right there on the pharmacy windowsill. With trembling hands, she assembled the nebulizer, poured in the medication, and plugged the machine into a wall outlet near the entrance. The machine began to hum quietly. Sarah pressed the clear plastic mask over David's tiny face. A thick cloud of life-saving steam enveloped the child. The pharmacist stepped out from behind the bulletproof glass and handed Sarah a cup of water. Watching them in silence. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. David's breathing began to even out. The blue tint around his lips slowly faded, giving way to a natural, pâle complexion. The wheezing softened. The boy took a deep breath of the medicated vapor and opened his eyes. He looked at Sarah with a lucid, exhausted gaze, and began to cry quietly in a normal, clear voice. Only then did Sarah realize her legs were giving out. She slid down the wall of the pharmacy, sitting right on the dirty tile floor, clutching her son tightly to her chest. The tears she had held back all these terrifying months finally broke free. She cried from the horror she had just lived through, from the overwhelming relief, and from the physical pain in her raw, scraped finger. The morning dawned crisp and cold. Sarah sat on the floor of the bedroom, her back leaning against the crib. The apartment was quiet. Mrs. Higgins had gone home hours ago. In one crib, David, alive and safe, was breathing evenly. In the other, Lily was sleeping soundly, occasionally smacking her lips. Sarah looked down at her left hand. The white mark from her wedding ring was still clearly visible. Last night, along with that piece of metal, she had left her final fears at the pawn shop. She left behind her dependence on her husband, her self-pity, and the illusion that someone else was going to solve her problems. She realized the most important thing. If she could pull her child back from the brink of death with literally $0 in her pocket, she could do anything. But staying in this city was no longer an option. The memories were suffocating. And the past of the young girl, Maya, who had fled from cruel, violent people, could catch up to them at any moment. The town was too small. Someone might start asking questions. Child Protective Services might show up for a random inspection. Rumors could easily reach the very people Maya had been hiding her babies from. Sarah slowly stood up from the floor. She walked over to the desk, grabbed a pen and a blank sheet of paper. In large, decisive handwriting, she wrote, "Urgent, selling 2-bedroom apartment. Will consider trades for housing out of state. Willing to review all offers." She looked back at the sleeping children. David frowned in his sleep, his tiny dark eyebrows knitting together. Sarah leaned over and tucked the blanket around him. "I will survive for you," she said quietly but firmly into the empty room. "And we are going to forget the past forever. I will take you somewhere. No one will ever find us." She folded the piece of paper in half and went to pack their bags. Life was starting over with a clean slate. 20 years flew by for Sarah, like one long, chaotic, but incredibly happy day. The new city had long since become home. The cramped, rented two-bedroom apartment had been replaced by a cozy, though modest, three-bedroom condo in a quiet suburb. That morning, the kitchen smelled of fresh pancakes and strong coffee. Sarah stood by the stove. Silver highlights were now clearly visible in her light brown hair. Soft smile lines fanned out from the corners of her eyes. But her gaze remained as warm and clear as ever. She had just turned 52. And every single morning, she thanked fate for the choice she made. Sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by thick anatomy textbooks, was Lily. The young woman was mechanically stirring her coffee with one hand while flipping pages with the other. From Maya, she had inherited thick, heavy, dark hair, which was currently gathered into a messy bun at the back of her head. But the moment Lily looked up, it was Liam staring back at Sarah, the same young man from the dark alley. Lily's eyes were piercingly blue and deep, an incredibly striking contrast to her olive skin, resting against her collarbone, gleaming dully in the light, was the massive antique pendant with the dark garnet. Sarah had gifted it to her daughter on her 18th birthday, making up a story about a family heirloom passed down from a great-grandmother. The front door slammed in the hallway. Heavy footsteps echoed. David walked into the kitchen. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp, striking facial features and jet-black hair. He was the spitting image of a mother whose face he had never seen. He smelled of morning crispness, motor oil, and a hint of tobacco. Morning, Mom. He kissed Sarah on the cheek, casually snagging a hot pancake off a plate. Hey. Short stack. Cramming bones into your brain again. I am a future surgeon. Not a short stack. Lily replied in a flat tone, never taking her eyes off the textbook. And it wouldn't kill you to wash your hands after being in the garage all night. David chuckled, tossed his jacket onto a chair, and sat down at the table. Well, actually, I wasn't at the garage. I quit. No more side gigs fixing beaters. Sarah stopped flipping the pancakes. She slowly wiped her hands on a dish towel and turned to her son. You quit. David. We talked about this. The auto shop was giving you a steady paycheck. You were planning to enroll in the technical college next year. Mom. It's just not my thing. Digging through grease and laying under other people's cars. David pushed his plate away, a stubborn spark ignited in his dark eyes. I found a real job. Fully on the books. At the Golden Horseshoe. The horse breeding ranch outside of town. They pay twice as much. And the work is real. It's alive. A cold chill spread through Sarah's chest. She slowly sank into the chair opposite her son. At a horse ranch. Doing what? Just a stable hand for now. But we'll see. David shrugged, completely oblivious to his mother's sudden panic. I went out there yesterday to check the place out. Mom. You should see these horses. Thoroughbreds. Arabians. The second I walked into the stables. The second I smelled it. It was like I came home. They hired me on the spot. The foreman said I have a heavy but steady hand. The horses listened to me. Sarah stayed silent. She stared at her son's strong, tanned hands. At his proud, independent profile. For all these 20 years. This was the exact scenario she had feared the most. She had never believed in superstitions about bad blood or bad genetics. She knew she had raised an honest, hard-working boy. But she was terrified of the past. Sarah wasn't afraid of his bloodline. She was afraid that this instinctual, inexplicable pull David had toward horses would attract the attention of the wrong people. With his striking looks and natural talent, he could accidentally cross paths with Maya's ruthless relatives. And the world of elite horse breeders seemed like exactly the kind of circle those people would run in. David. That is backbreaking labor. Sarah tried her best to keep her voice steady. Mucking stalls. Carrying heavy feed. The discipline there is brutal. Why don't you look for something in the city? Construction pays just as well. Mom. My mind is made up. David clenched his jaw stubbornly. When he got like this, arguing with him was completely useless. I start my first shift on Monday. Don't worry. I won't let you down. Lily looked up from her textbook and stared intently at her mother. As a future doctor, she was incredibly adept at reading people's emotions. And she saw the color drain from Sarah's face. Mom. Let him try. The girl said softly. Once he gets tired of shoveling manure, he'll run right back to the garage. Sarah forced a smile and stood up from the table. All right. Song? Just be careful. They are massive animals. Anything can happen. She turned back to the sink, turned on the water, and closed her eyes. The anxiety she had kept buried for 20 years washed over her like a tidal wave. What Sarah didn't know was that years after Maya's disappearance, Richard Sterling had expanded his business empire and bought a massive, elite horse breeding facility in this very state. To Sarah, this city was a foreign, safe haven. To the past, it was a brand new road leading straight to the children. The elite horse ranch was located 20 miles outside the city limits. It was a massive, sprawling estate with flawless paved roads, pristine white fences lining the paddocks, and spacious, brilliantly lit stables. 75-year-old Richard Sterling hated sitting in an office. He had handed over the day-to-day management of his empire to his son, Ian's older half-brother, keeping only an advisory role for himself. The old man was severely ill. Time had taken its toll. His joints were inflamed with arthritis, and his heart frequently failed him. Most of the time, he moved around in a wheelchair, or walked with immense difficulty, leaning heavily on a solid cane with a silver handle. That Wednesday, Richard sat in a wheelchair on the open terrace of the guest house. A wool blanket draped over his legs. From here, he had a perfect view of the main training arena. It was loud down in the arena. A young, temperamental, pure black stallion was refusing to walk up the ramp into a transport trailer. The animal was snorting, striking the ground with its hooves, and rearing up. Two experienced stable hands were struggling to hold him on a lunge line, shouting and swearing at each other. Richard grimaced in irritation. He had zero tolerance for incompetence. He was just about to tell his security guard to fetch the foreman when a new worker stepped out into the arena. It was a young guy in a simple canvas work jacket. Richard squinted against the sun. The kid didn't yell. He gestured for the other hands to loosen the tension on the line and slowly, without making any sudden movements, approached the stallion. He was saying something quietly to the animal. The horse pinned its ears back and snorted. But the kid didn't back down. He confidently placed a hand on the horse's sweat-slicked neck, stroked it, and then, without stopping his quiet murmuring, calmly, and with absolute authority, pulled the halter. The stallion submissively followed him up the ramp, and right into the trailer. Richard leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his wheelchair, so tightly his knuckles turned white. It wasn't just how skillfully the kid handled the animal. It was his movements. The proud, slightly stubborn tilt of his head. The way he sharply turned around when the foreman barked something at him. The kid was standing in profile to the terrace. Jet black hair, sharp features, a stubborn jawline. Richard's breath caught in his throat. His chest suddenly felt tight and burning hot. Before his eyes, as clear as day, stood Maya, his defiant, rebellious daughter. She used to tame the horses at their old estate in exactly the same way. She used to toss her head back just like that whenever anyone tried to give her orders. "Get him up here," Richard ordered hoarsely to the security guard, standing behind him. Immediately. 5 minutes later, David walked up the steps to the terrace. He didn't take off his baseball cap. He stood tall, displaying neither fear nor the usual fawning subservience most employees showed the owner of the ranch. "What's your name?" Richard looked the boy up and down, hungrily studying every line of his face. "David." "Whose boy are you?" "David, who is your father? Where did you grow up?" The old man fired the questions off sharply. Rapidly, David frowned. He didn't like the old man's tone. "Grew up right here. In the city. Don't remember my dad. Single mom raised me. Sarah. She works as a nurse." Richard mentally exhaled. A nurse named Sarah. A local kid. It's just a random coincidence. A trick of nature. But the resemblance was tearing open old, unhealed wounds. The old man leaned back in his wheelchair. He didn't want to let this kid go. "You have a feel for horses," Richard stated as a fact. "Where did you learn?" "Nowhere. I'm just not scared of them," David answered shortly. "Can I go? I have stalls to muck out." Richard chuckled. Even that blatant disrespect felt painfully familiar. "Someone else will muck the stalls. Starting tomorrow. You answer directly to me. You'll be my personal assistant. You'll drive me. Help with paperwork. Escort me through the stables. Double pay. I didn't hire on to be a babysitter," David said bluntly. "I came here for the horses." The security guard took a step forward, intending to put the arrogant kid in his place. But Richard raised a hand, stopping him. "You will ride my personal horse for 3 hours a day. The rest of the time, you are with me. That's an order. Kid. Now get back to work." David gave a short nod and walked down the steps. Richard watched him go for a long time. His old heart was beating heavily and unevenly. He didn't know why. But sitting next to this kid made it easier to breathe. It was as if a piece of his long-lost family had miraculously appeared by his side. October of that year was dry and sunny. Lily was walking home from her lectures through the old city park. Yellow leaves crunched beneath her sneakers. The girl walked at a leisurely pace, running through flashcards for an upcoming pharmacology exam in her head. Her jacket was unzipped, and against her gray sweater, the massive antique pendant with the dark garnet stood out clearly. Sitting on a wooden bench near the park entrance was an elderly woman in a long, dark skirt and a thick black shawl. It was Rosa, after the death of Richard's wife, Maya's mother. Rosa had worked as a housekeeper in the Sterling estate for many years. But old age and failing health had eventually forced her to retire. Now, she made extra cash reading palms for the occasional passerby, though a genuine gift of intuition truly flickered inside her, mixed with incredibly sharp observational skills. Lily walked past the bench. Rosa let an indifferent gaze slide over the college student. But suddenly, her eyes went wide. Her gaze snagged on the intricate gold filigree and the dark red stone resting on the girl's chest. The old woman lunged forward. She knew that piece of jewelry. She had seen that exact pendant hundreds of times on the neck of Richard's late wife, and later on the neck of young Maya. On the very day the girl had run away from home. It was impossible to mistake that pendant for anything else. Rosa stood up heavily from the bench and moved as fast as her aching legs would allow, hurrying after the girl. "Hey! Beautiful. Wait." she called out in a raspy voice. Lily turned around. Seeing the old fortune teller, she instinctively quickened her pace. I'm sorry. I don't want my palm read. I don't have any cash. The girl said politely, but firmly. But Rosa had already caught up to her. The old woman reached out a dry, gnarled hand and unexpectedly grabbed Lily's wrist in a vice grip. The woman's fingers were cold and hard. I don't need your money, child. Rosa's voice trembled with agitation. She wasn't looking at Lily's face. Her eyes were glued to the pendant. Where did you get that? Who gave it to you? Let go of me. Lily was scared. She tried to yank her arm away. But the old woman held on tight. It's a gift from my mother. Let go. Or I'm going to scream. Rosa finally raised her eyes to the girl's face. She saw foreign, piercing blue eyes. But the shape of the face, the arch of the eyebrows, the thick dark hair. There was no doubt. The old woman's face contorted into a grimace of genuine horror and grief. Your mother, Rosa whispered, her voice breaking into a hoarse hiss. The woman who raised you, who loved you as her own. She doesn't share your blood. You're crazy. Lily pulled harder. Your real mother died in terrible agony, Rosa yelled loudly. Almost screaming. Refusing to let go. I know that stones seek the truth. Child. Before the past comes back for you itself, Lily finally managed to wrench her arm free. She stumbled back from the old woman, breathing heavily. There was no madness in the fortune teller's eyes. There was only absolute, terrifying certainty. The girl spun around and practically sprinted down the park alley. Never looking back. She only stopped once she was a block away. Her heart was pounding so hard, she could hear it in her ears. Lily leaned her back against a brick wall. The rational mind of a future doctor told her it was just a cheap trick by a street scammer. She noticed an unusual piece of jewelry and threw out some standard, dramatic phrases to scare her into handing over cash. But then why did she feel so empty and cold inside? Why did the words about not sharing the same blood hit with such terrifying precision? Lily suddenly realized that Sarah had always deflected questions about who she and David looked like. She realized there wasn't a single photograph in the house of Sarah pregnant. She remembered how nervous her mother got whenever David asked questions about their ancestry. Lily pulled her cell phone from her pocket. Her fingers were trembling slightly. She dialed her home number. At that moment, Sarah was dusting the bookshelves in the living room. Hearing the phone ring, she picked it up. Hey, sweetie. Are you out of class already, Mom? Lily's voice sounded strange. Fractured. Mom. I was just walking through the park. Some old fortune teller came up to me. Sarah froze. The dusting cloth slowly slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor. She saw my pendant. Mom. And she said horrible things. She said my mother died in agony. She said you aren't my real mom. She said I have different blood. A suffocating silence hung on the line. The only sound was Lily's ragged breathing. Mom. Are you there? Tell me, she's just a crazy old lady. Please. Mom. Tell me it's not true. But Sarah couldn't speak. The air felt heavy. It was hard to breathe in the living room. The impenetrable wall she had built over 20 long years, protecting her children and hiding them from the world, collapsed in a single instant. The past had found them. It had found them through the antique pendant she herself had clasped around her daughter's neck. Sarah slowly sank into the nearest chair. Her legs could no longer hold her weight. Come home, Lily. Sarah's voice was quiet, even, and completely devoid of life. We all need to sit down and talk. I'll call David and tell him to leave his shift early. She placed the phone back on the receiver. The apartment was perfectly silent. But to Sarah, it sounded like a deafening alarm bell. The time to pay for her secret had come. The short dial tone echoing from the phone receiver pounded like a hammer in Sarah's temples. She slowly set the receiver back onto its base. The air in the apartment felt heavy. Almost tangible. For 20 years. She had built an invisible but impenetrable fortress around her family. For 20 years. She fell asleep, believing the past had been buried in that rainy night in a foreign city. And now, one random glance from an old street psychic had destroyed it all. Sarah looked at her hands. Her fingers were trembling rapidly. She rubbed her palms together, trying to force warmth back into them. Then stood up from the chair. Her legs felt weak, as if she had suddenly aged 10 years. She walked into the bedroom. The room smelled of cleanliness and fresh linens. Sarah walked over to the wardrobe, dropped to her knees, and pulled out the bottom drawer. Hidden beneath a stack of spare blankets and towels was an old wooden jewelry box. The very same box her ex-husband Greg had emptied of her last few dollars all those years ago. Sarah pulled the box out, placed it on her lap, and flipped the lid open. Resting at the bottom, inside a clear plastic sleeve, was Maya's letter. The paper had yellowed long ago. The folds were worn thin, and the mud stains from that terrible night had dried and darkened. Tonight, she was going to have to take this letter out. She was going to have to sit across from David and Lily, look them in the face, and tell them the truth. Tell them that the woman who loved them more than her own life didn't share a single drop of blood with them. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to gather her thoughts. Lily's voice echoed in her head. She said my mother died in agony. What else could that old woman have told her? And most importantly, who else was she going to tell about the girl wearing the rare antique pendant? A sharp, demanding ring of the doorbell made Sarah jump. She quickly opened her eyes and looked at the wall clock. 4:30. Lily had to commute across the entire city. She couldn't have made it back this fast. David wasn't supposed to be back from the horse ranch until at least 6. The doorbell rang again. Longer. More insistent. Sarah placed the wooden box on the bed, smoothed her hair, and walked out into the hallway. The anxiety that had settled in her chest after the call with her daughter turned dense and ice-cold. She walked up to the door and looked through the peephole. Standing on the landing was a man. Tall, broad-shouldered. He was wearing a simple dark jacket. He stood slightly sideways, leaning heavily on a solid wooden cane with his right hand. Sarah could only see part of his face, sharp features, a deep crease near his mouth, and a long, faded white scar cutting across his cheekbone. She was certain she had never seen this man before in her life. She could have ignored it. She could have pretended no one was home. But an instinct forged by years of night shifts in the ER told her this man wasn't going to leave. Sarah unlatched the deadbolt and cracked the door open, leaving the heavy chain lock secured. "Can I help you?" Her voice sounded dry and strained. The man slowly turned his head. In the dim light of the hallway, his eyes looked almost black. But when he raised his gaze to meet Sarah's, she saw that they were piercingly blue. Heavy, exhausted blue eyes that had seen far too much pain. The exact same eyes that looked at Sarah every single morning from Lily's face. Sarah stopped breathing. Her fingers dug into the edge of the door. "Sarah." The man's voice was hoarse, catching slightly, as if just saying her name required immense effort. "Yes," she managed to squeeze out. The man shifted his weight on his cane. His knuckles, gripping the wooden handle, turned white from the tension. 20 years ago. You were the on-call maternity nurse at City General. In November. On a night when there was a massive freezing rainstorm. The words hit their target with terrifying precision. Destroying her final illusions. Sarah instinctively took a step back. The door almost shut. But the man was quick enough to wedge his heavy boot between the frame and the metal door. "Please," he said quietly. There was no threat in his voice. There was only a hollow, infinite exhaustion. "I've been looking for you all these years. Just listen to me." Sarah stared at the scar on his face. She stared at his blue eyes. The puzzle pieces that hadn't fit together 20 years ago because of the dying Maya's final words were now assembling into one terrifying picture. Maya said they killed him. But the man standing on her porch was alive. With trembling hands. She unhooked the chain and pulled the door wide open. "Come in." The man stepped over the threshold. He walked with a heavy, pronounced limp, favoring his right leg. He stopped in the entryway, took off his jacket, and hung it on a hook. His movements were stiff and cautious. Sarah watched him in silence, feeling everything inside her twist into a tight knot. She led him into the kitchen, the brightest room in the apartment. The man sat down on a stool, leaning his cane against the table. Sarah sat across from him. For several minutes, they just looked at each other in absolute silence. The only sound was the wind howling outside the window. "My name is Liam," he finally said. "I am Maya's husband." Sarah covered her face with her hands. It was unbearable. 2 devastating blows in a single day. She had prepared herself to protect the children from Maya's cruel father. From mobsters. From anyone. But she was not prepared for a man to show up on her doorstep who had a legal blood right to David and Lily. The man for whom Maya had sacrificed everything. "She thought you were dead," Sarah said numbly, keeping her hands over her face. "That night, when she came into the ER. She said she watched them hit you in the alley." Liam swallowed hard. The muscles in his jaw twitched. And the scar on his cheek turned stark white. "I didn't die." His voice dropped quieter. "I was hit from behind with a heavy pipe to the skull. I lay on the wet asphalt until the morning street sweepers found me. The neurosurgeons said people don't survive injuries like that. I lay in a coma in a county hospital for 3 years as a John Doe. I had no ID on me. We rented the apartment under the table. And my legal address was in a different state. Maya wasn't there to look for me." He paused, gathering his strength. To Sarah, it felt as if all the oxygen had been sucked out of the kitchen. It was hard to breathe. "When I woke up," Liam continued, staring at his large, calloused hands resting on the table, "I remembered nothing. Not my name. Not Maya's face. Nothing. I was a blank slate. I had to relearn how to walk. How to talk. How to hold a spoon. They transferred me to a state facility for the disabled. It took 9 more long years before my memory started coming back. First in flashes. The smell of her hair. The sound of her laugh. Then, I remembered that night. I remembered the alley. The rain. And the face of the man who hit me." Sarah looked at this man with involuntary respect. To go through that kind of hell and not break. To hold on to his sanity. It required unbelievable willpower. "I left the state facility." Liam's voice grew stronger. A steel edge rang in his tone. "I went back to that city. I found our old apartment building. The neighbors told me that on the night I was attacked, Maya disappeared too. All that was left in the alley were footprints. I went to the police. I pulled every public archive on unidentified bodies from that year. I searched for her for months. And I found her. A nameless grave in the city cemetery with a number on a metal plate. According to the police reports, she was listed as an unidentified Jane Doe who died from massive blood loss at City General. Liam stopped talking. His shoulders slumped. He stared at the vinyl tablecloth for a long time, as if he were looking at that very metal plate with the number. I realized she was running from Vance. He said quietly. I realized she was looking for help. I went to the hospital. The head doctor was long gone. The old logbooks had been sent to the archives. I bribed the clerks. I spent weeks sitting in dusty basements, sifting through old patient cards. I found the death record for the unidentified Jane Doe on that specific night. And on that same record was the name of the on-call nurse. Your name. Sarah. Sarah sat perfectly straight. She didn't try to make excuses or defend herself. The rest was just legwork. Liam raised his heavy gaze to her. I found out that a month after that night, you hastily sold your apartment and quit your job. But people don't just vanish into thin air. Tax records. Old DMV files. Friends of friends. One retired cop. Then a private investigator. It took me another 8 years to find this address. And here I am. The man slowly reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, hanging on the chair. His fingers were visibly trembling. He searched for a long time, as if terrified to bring what he found into the light. Finally, he placed a small, carefully folded clear plastic sandwich bag onto the table. Sarah looked at the bag, and a lump formed in her throat. Inside lay 2 pairs of tiny, knitted baby booties. One pair was a pale yellow, the other a faded light green. The wool yarn had matted and lost its shape from time and being handled so often. I bought them from some old lady at a flea market a month before. Before that alley. Liam's voice broke. He stared at the booties as if they were a holy relic. The seller told me she had a sixth sense, and told me to buy 2 pairs, just in case. I put them in the pocket of my work jacket. And when the ambulance took me, they just stayed in there. They gave them back to me at the rehab facility, along with my old clothes. I carried them through the darkness. Through years of absolute emptiness. I held them in my hands when I didn't want to live anymore. And they forced me to keep breathing. Liam raised his eyes to Sarah. They were filled with unshed, bitter tears. I know Maya is gone. I found her grave. But I read in the archives that on that exact same night, foundling infants were discovered on the hospital steps. And then, Nurse Sarah took custody of them. He leaned forward. His massive hand covered the plastic bag with the booties. Sarah, I am begging you. Do not lie to me. What happened to my child? Which one did she give birth to? A ringing, tense silence hung in the kitchen. Sarah looked at this broken, but unsurrendered man. She saw his pain, his hope, his absolute despair. For 20 years, she had considered herself their only mother. For 20 years, she had hidden them. But now, looking at those yellowed baby booties, she realized she had no right to steal the truth from him. Maya loved him. And these children were the product of their love. Sarah slowly covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders began to shake. The tears she had been holding back since that morning broke through in a hot, uncontrollable flood. There were 2 of them. Liam. She gasped through heavy sobs. The man froze. He stopped breathing. Sarah pulled her hands away from her face. Her eyes were red. Maya gave birth to twins. A boy and a girl. Liam slowly leaned back against his chair. His face turned terrifyingly pale. He stared at Sarah, trying to process the meaning of her words. Tfo. He whispered, looking at the 2 pairs of booties on the table. And they? Where are they? In foster care. In adopted families. No, Sarah shook her head, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. Right before she died, Maya made me swear an oath. She said her family's people would look for the babies, that they would hurt them. She begged me to hide them. So I gave away every dime I had to my name to process them as safe haven drop-offs so I could adopt them myself. Sarah looked him dead in the eye. They are alive. Liam. They are grown up. They are 20 years old. I named them David and Lily. And they live right here. With me. Liam's arms fell limply to his lap. His cane clattered to the linoleum floor. But he didn't even notice. The man who had survived a crowbar to the skull, who had fought through a coma and profound amnesia, sat before Sarah and wept in absolute silence. Large tears streamed down his scarred face, leaving wet trails. He didn't wipe them away. He just stared at the kitchen table, unable to believe that his life, destroyed down to its very foundation, suddenly had meaning again. From the hallway came the sound of a key turning in the lock. Sarah flinched. Time was up. The front door slammed shut. The heavy tread of David's boots and the light click of Lily's heels echoed in the entryway. "Mom. We're home," David yelled from the hall. He could be heard kicking off his work boots. Ran into Short Stack outside the building. "Can you believe it?" She didn't say a word the whole way up the stairs. "What's the emergency?" Sarah quickly wiped her face with a dish towel and stood up from the table. Liam tried to stand as well, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He remained seated, frantically gripping the plastic bag of booties in his hand. Lily walked into the kitchen. She was wearing a light trench coat. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold wind. Behind her appeared David in his canvas work jacket, which carried the faint scent of hay and horses. They stopped in the doorway. The words died on their lips. Lily saw her mother's tear-stained face. David immediately zeroed in on the strange man sitting at their table. The young man's gaze instantly turned hard and calculating. "Mom. What happened?" David took a step forward, instinctively pushing his sister behind his back. "Who is this? Did he hurt you?" Liam slowly stood up. He looked at Lily, at her thick dark hair, messily pinned up, and at her deep blue eyes, his own eyes. Then his gaze shifted to David. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a sharp, proud profile, a stubborn jaw, and dark, almost black eyes. Maya's face. Maya's gaze. Liam opened his mouth to say something, but couldn't make a sound. His lips trembled. He was looking at his children, whom he had never seen, whom he had mourned for 20 years. And he couldn't believe they were real, that they were standing right here in front of him. Lily looked back and forth between the stranger and her mother in confusion. The pre-med student immediately noticed the scar on the man's face, his unhealthy pallor, and his shaking hands. "Mom," she called out quietly. "Explain to us what is going on. First that crazy woman in the park this morning. Now this man." Sarah walked over to the kids. She took David's hand, then took Lily's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Come in. Sit down at the table." Sarah's voice was hollow, but firm. David reluctantly obeyed, never taking a cautious, defensive glare off the stranger. Lily sat next to her brother. Sarah walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a pitcher of water, and poured a glass for herself and one for Liam. The man took the glass with both hands. Water sloshed over the rim. Then Sarah walked into the bedroom and returned a minute later. In her hands, she held the old wooden jewelry box. She placed the box in the exact center of the kitchen table, right between David, Lily, and Liam. For 20 years. I lived in terror that this day would come. Sarah looked at her children. In her gaze was so much love and so much pain that it scared Lily. For 20 years. I kept quiet to protect you. So you would grow up as normal kids. Without knowing fear or looking over your shoulders. But the truth always finds a way out. She opened the box. Took out the plastic sleeve. And pulled out Maya's yellowed, stained letter. David frowned. Staring at the incomprehensible piece of paper. Lily instinctively pressed her hand to her chest. Right, where the massive garnet pendant hung beneath her sweater. The woman in the park didn't lie to you. Lily. Sarah's voice cracked. I am not your biological mother. Neither of you. You do not share my blood. David exhaled sharply. As if he had been punched in the gut. He leaned back in his chair. What kind of crazy talk is this? Mom, he asked gruffly. But panic was splashing in his eyes. What biological mother? You gave birth to us. No. David. I was the delivery nurse on shift the night you were brought into this world. Your real mother was a young girl who ran away from a very wealthy, very dangerous family. Her name was Maya. She gave her life for you on the operating table. And right before she died, she wrote this letter. Sarah slid the yellowed piece of paper across the table. Placing it in front of Lily. Read it. Sweetie. Sarah said quietly. Read it out loud. It is time you know who you are. And why this man walked through absolute hell. Just to find you. Lily reached out with stiff, trembling fingers, and picked up the letter. Her eyes scanned the first few uneven lines. The letters jumped around. The meaning didn't register immediately. The kitchen was dead silent. Broken only by Liam's heavy, jagged breathing. The paper shook in Lily's hands. The girl swallowed the hard lump in her throat and began to read. Her voice, at first, quiet and uncertain, gradually gained strength. Filling the small kitchen. My children. If you are reading this letter, it means I am no longer in this world. And the person I entrusted you to kept her word. I am giving away the most precious thing I have. Because I know that with me, you will not survive. I loved your father more than life itself. His name was Liam. He was a simple guy. Honest and brave. My father. Richard. I wanted to marry me off to another man. Vance. For profit, and to expand his business empire. My opinion meant nothing. But your father and I ran away. We lived in poverty. But I was never as happy as I was during those few months. We thought they would leave us alone. But Vance's wounded pride proved stronger than common sense. Tonight, when you were so close to being born, he tracked us down. He didn't face Liam like a man. He struck him in the back of the head with a metal pipe from the shadows. I saw your father fall. I saw Vance's face. He shoved me onto the asphalt when I tried to help my husband. The impact triggered premature labor. I am writing these lines on a crumpled piece of paper. Hiding in a stranger's stairwell from the rain. Vance will not leave us alive if he realizes I saw his face. I need to gather my last bit of strength to make it to the hospital. But I can feel my life draining away with every drop of blood. Do not seek revenge. Revenge has already destroyed our family. Just know this: your father did not abandon you. He died because of his love for me. And the woman who will raise you is your true mother. Love her and be happy. Yours, Maya. Lily stopped reading. She lowered the letter to the table and covered her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. David sat perfectly still, staring blankly at a single spot on the vinyl tablecloth. The muscles in his jaw flexed furiously. And his fists were clenched so tight. His knuckles were white. Sarah looked at the children, afraid to speak. For 20 years, she had awaited this moment with sheer terror. But right now, she felt only a strange, draining sense of peace. Suddenly, the dull thud of a wooden cane hitting the floor broke the silence. Liam slowly, with visible agony, stood up from his chair. He leaned his entire weight onto the cane with both hands, supporting his large, broken body. He looked at David, then at Lily. "I didn't die." His voice was hoarse, fractured. "I didn't die. Maya." He turned to Sarah. She instinctively pressed herself back against her chair. But Liam made no move to approach her. Instead, he shifted his cane to his left hand and leaned heavily against the edge of the table with his right. His right knee slowly bent. The cane clattered to the linoleum. The man who had survived a coma, memory loss, and years of absolute despair, dropped heavily to his knees in front of Sarah. "Get up, Liam. Please." Sarah leaned forward, reaching out with trembling hands. "No." He shook his head, never lifting his eyes to meet hers. "You saved them. You walked through poverty. You hid them. You raised them into incredible people. I spent my life searching for my blood just to find a reason to keep living. But I will never step between you. You are their mother. I am just a man who showed up 20 years too late. Thank you. For every day they have lived. For every breath they take." Sarah couldn't hold it in anymore. She covered her face with a dish towel and began to sob uncontrollably, loudly releasing all the pain and tension of the last 2 decades. David stood up abruptly. He walked around the table, went up to Sarah, and wrapped his arms tightly around her shoulders, pulling her against his chest. "Mom. Come on. Stop." His voice cracked, but he tried to sound strong. "Why are you crying? We're right here. We're not going anywhere." Lily walked up from the other side, burying her face into her mother's shoulder. Then, David looked down at the man kneeling on the floor. The young man leaned over, grabbed Liam under the elbow, and hauled him up. "Get up," David said firmly, looking straight into the blue eyes that were so identical to his sister's. "You aren't late. You just had a long road to get here. Sit down at the table. We have a lot to talk about." The next morning at the elite horse ranch dawned overcast. Low gray clouds snagged on the roofs of the stables. The air smelled of damp earth and impending rain. David arrived for his shift earlier than usual. The sleepless night spent talking in the cramped kitchen hadn't left him exhausted, only with a heavy, ringing clarity in his head. He needed to occupy his hands with brutal physical labor to process everything he had learned about his real father, and about the mother he had never met. He was mucking out the stall of a young stallion when a security guard poked his head into the stable. "David. Drop the pitchfork. The boss wants you in the main house. Right now." The owner of the ranch was in his ground floor office. The old man sat in a deep leather chair behind a massive mahogany desk. A half-empty glass of water sat in front of him. His face looked more ashen and drawn than usual. David walked in, wiping his hands on his canvas work pants. "You called for me, Mr. Sterling." The old man raised a heavy gaze to him. He opened his mouth to say something. But at that exact moment, the cell phone on his desk rang sharply. Richard glanced at the screen, frowned, and pressed answer. "Yes. Rosa. I'm listening." David remained standing by the door, awaiting orders. The office was dead quiet, so the elderly woman's voice coming through the phone speaker was perfectly audible. Richard. Rosa's voice trembled with agitation. You can fire me. You can call me crazy. But I have to tell you. I saw her. Who? The old man irritably rubbed the bridge of his nose. A girl in the city park. A college student. Around her neck. She was wearing Maya's pendant. The antique garnet. I am not mistaken. Richard. I remember every scratch on that stone. I went up to her. She has our blood. Her eyes are different bright blue but her face. It's the spitting image of Maya. She is alive. Richard. Maya's bloodline is alive. The ranch owner froze. The phone trembled in his hand. He slowly shifted his gaze to David. Standing by the door. To his thick, jet black hair. His sharp profile. His stubborn jawline. In the old man's head. With a deafening crash. The pieces he had stubbornly refused to see slammed together. An olive-skinned boy who instinctively understood horses, his age exactly 20 years old. Rosa. Richard rasped. Are you sure? I swear on my life. Richard. She told me she was adopted. Said her mother passed the pendant down to her. They survived. Richard tried to take a breath. But the air caught in his throat. The heavy tightness in his chest was suddenly replaced by a sharp, agonizing pain. The old man dropped the phone. The device clattered loudly against the polished wood desk. Richard clutched the left side of his chest, crushing the thick fabric of his dress shirt. His face rapidly turned a sickly gray. His lips took on a bluish tint. He tried to say something to David. But only a hollow, gurgling sound escaped his throat. The old man's eyes rolled back. And he slumped heavily to the side, striking his temple against the edge of the desk. Before crashing to the floor, taking the heavy leather chair down with him. Mr. Sterling. David lunged toward the desk in 2 strides. He threw the heavy chair off the old man and dropped to his knees. The ranch owner was taking shallow, ragged breaths, accompanied by a terrifying rattle. A thick sweat broke out on his forehead. Security, get an ambulance in here. Now David roared at the top of his lungs. Realizing that every second counted, he unbuttoned the top buttons of Richard's shirt and loosened his belt. Panic washed over him. This harsh old man, whom so many feared, had in a very short time become something of a mentor to David. Half an hour later, an ambulance with blazing sirens raced down the highway toward the city. David sat in the cramped back next to the stretcher. The paramedics worked with silent precision. They started an IV, placed an oxygen mask over the old man's face, and hooked him up to the monitors. The EKG machine beeped a nasty, erratic rhythm. Hang in there. Olmen. David said quietly, looking down at his boss's pale face. He didn't even realize why he called him that. The emergency room at the County Heart Institute was total chaos. The gurney carrying Richard was quickly rushed through the heavy, frosted doors of the ICU. David was left standing in the hallway. He smelled of hay, horse sweat, and fear. An attending physician walked up to him, reviewing some files on a tablet as he moved. Are you family? I'm his assistant from the horse ranch. David nervously wiped his hands on his jacket. What's wrong with him? Massive transmural myocardial infarction of the anterior wall. The doctor rattled off dryly. Ventricular fibrillation. Hemodynamics are highly unstable. His condition is critical. Age is a major factor here. We are prepping him for an emergency stent placement. But there are absolutely no guarantees. Go to the front desk. Fill out his admission forms. And contact his immediate family. The doctor turned and walked away, leaving David utterly lost. The medical jargon sounded like a death sentence in a foreign language. He only understood one thing: the old man was dying. And David was completely helpless. He pulled out his phone and with shaking fingers dialed his sister. Lily. He exhaled the second she picked up. Lily. I need your help. I'm at the County Heart Institute. My boss, Mr. Sterling. He collapsed at work. David. Calm down. What are the doctors saying? His sister's voice instantly became focused and professional. I don't understand their medical mumbo-jumbo. They said something about a transmural infarction and fibrillation. They're prepping him for a stent. Lee. Please come down here. Talk to them in doctor speak. I'm terrified for him. I know he's a hard ass. But he feels like family to me. I got it. I'm leaving now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Lily replied shortly. And hung up. Sarah and Liam were sitting in the living room, going through old photo albums. What happened? Sarah instantly noticed her daughter's face change. Emergency at David's work. The owner of the ranch had a massive heart attack and is in the ICU. David's there alone. Doesn't understand what's happening. He asked me to come talk to the doctors. I'm going with you. Liam stood up heavily from the couch, leaning on his cane. The boy needs support. May too. Sarah hurried to the hallway to grab her coat. We are a family now. We aren't leaving him there alone. Half an hour later, the three of them walked into the spacious, brightly lit lobby of the cardiology center. David was sitting on a plastic chair, his head in his hands, seeing his mother, sister, and Liam. He quickly stood up. Lily marched straight to the nurse's station to get the clinical details from the on-call intensivist. She returned 10 minutes later. She looked exhausted. The surgery was successful. They placed the stent, she told David. They stabilized his blood pressure. But he is still in critical condition. He's in a private room in the ICU. No visitors yet. Too long. Agonizing hours of waiting passed. David paced the hallway. Sarah sat next to Liam, who silently stared at his large hands resting on the handle of his cane. Finally, a doctor walked through the glass doors of the ICU. Who is here for the patient from the horse ranch? David took a step forward. He's conscious, the doctor said. Hemodynamics are holding steady. He is asking to see the kid named David. Strictly for 2 minutes. Just to keep him calm. David nodded and turned to Lily. Come with me. Look at the monitors so I know he's actually okay. The doctor tried to object, but Lily quickly said, I'm a third-year pre-med student. I know the protocols. Will only be a minute. They put on sterile gowns and shoe covers, walked down the quiet hallway, and entered the room. The life support machines hummed quietly. Richard lay on a highly elevated hospital bed. He looked smaller and frailer than he ever had in real life. His face was ghostly pale. Clear four tubes snaked into his arms. Hearing footsteps, the old man struggled to open his eyes. David. His voice was barely audible from beneath the oxygen mask. I'm right here. Mr. Sterling. You really scared us. David stepped closer to the bed. Everything's going to be fine. The doctors said the surgery was a success. I brought my sister. She's going to be a doctor. She says your vitals are looking good. Richard slowly shifted his gaze to the girl standing behind David. Lily stepped closer to the bed to check the patient monitor. The top button of her scrubs was unfastened, and in the bright glare of the hospital lights, the massive antique pendant with the dark garnet gleamed dully. The old man's eyes went wide. He stared at that stone, completely forgetting the pain in his chest. Forgetting the wires attached to his body. His wife's pendant. His daughter's pendant. He shifted his gaze to Lily's face. The thick dark hair. The shape of her face. And those foreign, piercing blue eyes. Maya. A hoarse whisper escaped from beneath the oxygen mask. Richard's fingers frantically crumpled the hospital sheet. My Maya. Lily froze. She looked at the old man, not understanding how he knew her biological mother's name. David frowned too. At that moment, the door to the hospital room quietly clicked open. Liam, unable to sit in the waiting room any longer, had broken the doctor's rules and walked inside. He leaned heavily on his cane. His footsteps on the linoleum were slow and rhythmic. He walked toward the bed, intending to pull his kids out before they agitated the patient. Richard forced his eyes away from Lily and looked at the man who had just walked in. He looked at his massive build, at the long white scar cutting across his cheekbone, and at the blue eyes, the exact same eyes he was looking at right now on the girl's face. 20 years ago, Richard had ordered Vance to teach this kid a lesson. To scare him so badly, he'd forget the road to his daughter. Richard never ordered a hit. He didn't even know Vance had crossed the line until Maya disappeared. But now, this boy, whom Richard had blamed as the root cause of all his misery, was standing right in front of him. Aged, broken, but alive. And the two children standing next to him. The olive-skinned boy who looked exactly like Maya, and the girl wearing her pendant, were his own flesh and blood. The old man's mind couldn't process the scene. The puzzle, blown to pieces 20 years ago, because of his own arrogant pride, clicked back together, right here in this sterile hospital room. You. Richard tried to push himself up on the pillows, but his strength failed him. The monitor began to beep rapidly in alarm. You survived. Liam. Liam stopped. His fingers tightened around his cane. He stared at the domineering old man who had once destroyed his life. And on Liam's face, there was no anger, no hatred, only the deep, infinite exhaustion of a man who had finally reached the end of a very long road. David looked back and forth between his boss and Liam in pure shock. You guys know each other. The young man's voice trembled. Richard closed his eyes. From beneath his wrinkled eyelids, tears rolled down his pale cheeks. I am your grandfather. David. Richard whispered, every word costing him agonizing pain. Forgive me. Forgive me. All of you. In the intensive care unit. The oxygen concentrator hummed rhythmically. The steady, mechanical sound only amplified the unbearable weight of the moment. Richard stared at Liam. The old man, accustomed to commanding the fates of hundreds of people, now looked like nothing more than an exhausted patient, pinned to a hospital bed, not just by illness, but by the crushing weight of his own past. Tears streamed down the ranch owner's cheeks. He made no attempt to hide or wipe them away. Forgive me, Liam. Richard rasped. Every word required a visible, agonizing effort. His chest heaved heavily. I stole your life. I stole your wife. I was a blind, arrogant, old fool who thought he could buy happiness for his daughter. Liam stood perfectly still. He shifted all his weight onto his wooden cane. His face, slashed by the old scar, remained stoic. But in his blue eyes, there was no thirst for blood. There was only a massive, scorched emptiness that was only just beginning to fill with meaning. Your apology won't bring Maya back, Liam answered in a flat, hollow voice. And it won't give me back the 20 years I spent in the dark. but you gave life to the woman I loved. And you are the grandfather of my children. I am not your judge. Richard. Time will be your judge. Richard shifted his gaze to Lily and David. The girl stood close to her brother, nervously, twisting the edge of her white medical gown. David was frowning, struggling to process the fact that the harsh, demanding boss he respected was actually his own grandfather, the man responsible for destroying their real family. I am not asking for your love. The old man swallowed hard. I haven't earned it. I am only asking you to let me see you. Just occasionally. To know that Maya's bloodline lives on. Liam took a slow step toward the bed. His cane clicked sharply against the linoleum. I have only one question for you. Richard. Liam's voice turned hard. Almost metallic. That man. Vance. Where is he? Hearing that name, Lily instinctively stepped closer to Sarah. As if seeking protection. David tensed, his shoulders pulling up defensively. Richard's face changed entirely. The tears dried instantly, giving way to the cold, calculating expression David had seen him wear so often during brutal business negotiations. Did you really think I let my daughter's death go unpunished? The old man asked quietly. When I found out the truth. When my people pieced together exactly what happened that night. I realized it was Vance who struck you. And because of his actions, Maya ran into the storm and died. Richard paused, gathering his strength. I could have had him killed. He stated simply. It would have been easy. One phone call to the right people. But a quick death is a mercy. And he did not deserve mercy. I systematically stripped him of absolutely everything. I destroyed his family's business empire. I bought up all their debt and drove them into complete bankruptcy. Once he lost his money, everyone turned their backs on him. Private medical care became unaffordable. And his old friends vanished. Liam stared unblinking into the old man's eyes. He is alive. Richard continued. But his spine was shattered in 3 places. He is permanently paralyzed from the neck down. Confined to a wheelchair, forever. Right now. He is sitting in a state-run facility for indigent patients in the next county over. Living in a ward with 5 other people. His mind is perfectly clear and sharp. He is completely aware of his situation. He cannot even lift a spoon to his mouth without help. And every single day, when he wakes up in that poverty and isolation, he knows exactly what he is paying for. I left him alive. Liam. So, his life would become a living hell. The hospital room went dead silent. Liam nodded slowly. What he heard brought him no joy. But it brought him closure. The man who had shattered his skull received a punishment that fit the crime. Karma had caught up with Vance. But there was no happiness to be found in it for anyone. Richard shifted his tired gaze to Sarah. The nurse who had saved his grandchildren stood slightly apart, not interfering in the men's conversation. Sarah. The old man tried to lift his hand, but lacked the strength. Come closer. Please. Sarah took a few steps toward the bed. You did what I failed to do. Richard's voice trembled. You protected them. You sacrificed everything so they would grow up in love and safety. I owe you a debt I can never repay. I don't need anything from you. Mr. Sterling. Sarah answered calmly. They are my children. I did it for myself. I know. But I want to leave this world with a clear conscience. Tomorrow. My lawyers will be here. Half the assets of the Golden Horseshoe Ranch, including the land and the livestock, are being transferred to David. He has the instincts for it. He will manage. My son, Ian, will help him learn the ropes. For Lily, I am opening a targeted trust fund. By the time she gets her medical degree, she will have the capital to open her own private clinic. This isn't a payoff. This is the inheritance that rightfully belongs to Maya's children. Accept it. For their future. Sarah looked at David and Lily. Then shifted her gaze to Liam. The children's biological father gave a slow, confirming nod. Lowering his eyes. Arguing with an old man standing on the threshold of eternity was pointless. Richard Sterling lived for 2 more months. He lived long enough to see David make his first managerial decisions at the ranch. He lived long enough to hold Lily's hand on several occasions, telling her stories about how beautiful and stubborn her real mother had been. The old man passed away quietly. In his sleep. Surrounded by the family he had once lost and miraculously found again. A year passed. The August evening was warm and completely still. The open veranda of the city's finest country club was drowning in white flowers and twinkling string lights. The air smelled of grilled steak, expensive perfume, and the pine needles from the surrounding forest. Lily was getting married. Her chosen groom was a brilliant young trauma surgeon from the county hospital. The girl looked absolutely radiant in a simple, sleek white wedding dress, resting on her chest, contrasting sharply with the pristine white fabric, was the antique pendant, with the dark garnet, a symbol of her roots. At the head table sat the family. Sarah, dressed in an elegant pistachio-colored pantsuit, smiled as she watched the newlyweds dance. Sitting right next to her was Liam. Over the past year, the man had grown significantly stronger. A quiet, grounded confidence had returned to his eyes, though he still leaned on his wooden cane. He and Sarah never became a couple in the romantic sense, but they were bound together by a deep, unbreakable bond. They were both the parents of these children. David, wearing an expensive, perfectly tailored suit, sat on his mother's other side. After a year of co-managing the massive horse ranch, the young man had matured. His boyish awkwardness was gone, replaced by a commanding, quiet strength. He confidently ran the business alongside his uncle Ian, multiplying his grandfather's legacy. The live band on stage finished playing a slow song. The guests began making their way back to their seats. At that exact moment, a commotion broke out at the entrance to the veranda. The restaurant manager was trying to block the path of a man who was aggressively pushing his way inside. The man was wearing a cheap gray suit jacket, worn shiny at the elbows. His face was gaunt. Dark bags hung heavily under his eyes, and his thinning hair was sloppily combed to the side. He shoved the manager aside and stepped into the brightly lit space of the veranda. Sarah's smile vanished. She recognized him instantly. Greg, her ex-husband. The man who had abandoned her 20 years ago, stealing her last few dollars from the bedroom dresser. Greg greedily scanned the luxurious setting, the expensive designer clothes of the guests, and finally locked eyes on the head table. The local papers had written extensively about the division of the late millionaire Richard Sterling's estate, mentioning the sudden discovery of his long-lost grandchildren. Greg knew how to put 2 and 2 together. When he saw the names of the heirs, he realized that those stray mutts he had despised were now heirs to a massive fortune. He plastered a sickeningly sweet, fawning smile on his face and marched straight toward the newlyweds' table. Throwing his arms wide open, "Sarah Lily, my beautiful daughter," Greg announced loudly, ensuring everyone around them heard. His voice trembled with fake emotion. "David, my boy, Lord. Look how much you've grown. I have been searching for you my entire life. I couldn't find peace. As soon as I heard about the wedding, I rushed right over." The conversations at the nearby tables died instantly. The musicians hesitantly lowered their instruments. A heavy, Intensely awkward tension hung in the air. The wealthy guests stared in total bewilderment at the disheveled man crashing the elegant party. Sarah sat perfectly straight. Her face remained completely impassive. But her fingers gripped her cloth napkin tightly. Liam frowned and placed a heavy hand on the silver handle of his cane. But neither of them had time to intervene. David slowly stood up from the table. He stepped forward, entirely blocking Greg's path. Though broad-shouldered, with dark, unforgiving eyes, he towered over Sarah's ex-husband like a mountain of solid rock. Greg stopped. His smile faltered slightly. But he tried to reach out and pat the young man on the shoulder. Davie. Come on. Why are you looking at me like that? It's me. Your dad. Greg. We're family. David caught his wrist in midair. The young man's grip was like an iron vice. Greg winced in sharp pain. We do not have a father named Greg. David's voice wasn't loud. But the words echoed with crystal clarity across the dead-silent veranda. There was no anger in his tone. Only absolute, freezing contempt. David dropped Greg's arm and looked down at him. Our father is Liam. David gestured toward the scarred man with the cane sitting next to Sarah. And we were raised by the only woman we will ever call mother. The very same woman you left completely penniless with 2 newborns in her arms while one of them was literally suffocating to death. Greg looked around like a cornered rat. Dozens of eyes were boring into him, wealthy businessmen, elite doctors, and relatives from the Sterling family side. They all watched this pathetic display with open, naked disgust. Someone in the crowd let out a quiet scoff of contempt. Sarah. Come on. Tell him. Greg desperately tried to appeal to his ex-wife. His voice cracked into a pathetic whine. I made a mistake back then. I realized that now I'm in a really tough spot with housing right now. I figured. You know. Family. Helps family. Get out. David clipped the syllables like a judge delivering a sentence. He took a step forward, forcing Greg to stumble backward. Walk out those gates and forget the road to our family. Because if you don't, I will unleash security on you. And they will throw you out of here like a stray dog. Greg realized there would be no negotiation. The inheritance he had so desperately banked on was completely untouchable. Under the heavy, judgmental glares of the guests, amidst the quiet whispering behind his back, he hunched his shoulders and slunk away toward the exit. His public humiliation was absolute. The moment Greg's pathetic figure disappeared behind the restaurant archway, David gave a quick nod to the band. A light, unobtrusive jazz melody immediately filled the air, breaking the tension. The guests returned to their plates and their conversations, trying to pretend the ugly scene had never happened. But every single person there would remember that moment of pure, unadulterated justice. David returned to his seat. Sarah looked at her son. Tears of overwhelming pride shimmered in her eyes. The tiny, suffocating baby she had saved in that freezing, drafty apartment 20 years ago had grown into a true man, capable of protecting his family against anything. The waiters began passing out champagne flutes for the main toast. Lily stood up from her chair, holding a crystal glass. David stood up right next to his sister. Today is the happiest day of my life. Lily's voice trembled slightly with emotion, but rang out clear and true. But this day would never have happened if, 20 years ago, there hadn't been room in this world for a genuine miracle. She looked at Liam. Thank you, Dad, for never giving up, for walking through the absolute darkness to find us. Your love for our mother, Maya, gave us life. Lily shifted her gaze to Sarah. And thank you, Mom. At that word, Sarah lowered her eyes, desperately trying to hold back a flood of tears. Blood dictates how you are born, David continued, raising his glass high. But only love, sacrifice, and sleepless nights dictate who you become. You didn't just give us a roof over our heads. You gave us your entire life. And you never asked for a single thing in return. You taught us what it means to be human. The brother and sister clinked their glasses together. To the strongest, the kindest, and the absolute best mother in the whole world. Lily said loudly. To Sarah. Every single guest on the veranda stood up in unison. A wave of applause erupted through the crowd. Sarah looked at her beautiful, grown children. At Lily's blue eyes, shining with intelligence and compassion. At David's dark, fierce eyes, brimming with confidence and honor. She felt the warmth of Liam's hand as he quietly crouched, with profound respect, squeezed her palm under the table. 20 years ago, she made a choice that changed absolutely everything. And now, sitting at this table, surrounded by her massive, unconventional, but incredibly real family, Sarah finally knew for certain, good always wins. And love, sincere, selfless love will always prove stronger than any prejudice, any fear, and anyone else's hatred. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to leave a comment below. What did you think of Sarah's sacrifice? How would you have reacted if you were in her shoes when her husband abandoned her with 2 newborns? Let us know your thoughts. Please like this video and share it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to catch our next story. Have a wonderful day.